Today we're breaking down a story where a man sacrifices everything to save his wife's life, only to hear 5 words that change everything. I never asked you to save me. What he discovers next will make you question how well you really know the people closest to you. Let's dive into this one. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "I never asked you to save me," after I'd burned through every dollar I had to keep her breathing. 23 years of marriage, 2 kids, a mortgage I'd paid off early because I wanted us secure, and that's what I got. Rebecca walked out with another man 6 weeks after I drained my retirement account for her medical bills, and my daughter Natalie stood there telling me I was selfish for being hurt. My son Ethan was the only one who didn't lose his mind, and honestly, that's the only reason I'm still standing. I filed for divorce the same night they left, and I meant every word when I told them to get out of my house. People keep asking me if I regret it, if I went too far, if I should have been the bigger person. I sleep better now than I have in years, so you tell me. The thing about a long marriage is you stop seeing the signs because you think you know someone. Rebecca and I met in college, got married young, had Natalie right away, and Ethan 2 years later. She worked as a nurse for maybe 5 years before she decided staying home made more sense, and I never questioned it because I was making good money in sales and the kids needed someone around. I handled everything from the mortgage to the car payments to the college funds, and she handled the house and the kids' schedules. It worked, or at least I thought it did. Looking back now, I can see how I became the ATM and she became the beneficiary, but you don't see that stuff when you're in it. You just keep working and providing because that's what you signed up for. Have you ever felt like you were doing everything right, only to realize you were being played the whole time? The crash happened on a regular morning in early spring. Rebecca said she was heading to her yoga class, which she'd been doing twice a week for about 6 months. I was already at the office when I got the call from the hospital. The officer on the phone said there'd been an accident, that Rebecca's car had gone off the road and hit a concrete barrier, and I needed to come immediately. I don't even remember the drive there. Natalie drove in from her university 3 hours away, and Ethan left his high school early. We sat in that waiting room for hours, and when the surgeon finally came out, he said she'd make it, but the injuries were severe. Multiple surgeries, weeks in intensive care, months of rehab ahead of us. The bills started coming before she even left the ICU. Our insurance had a high deductible, $8,000 up front, and after that they covered 80%. Sounds reasonable until you're looking at surgical fees, specialist consultations, ICU charges running thousands per day, and rehab that wasn't fully covered. I pulled money from our savings first, then from the emergency fund I'd been building for 15 years. When that ran dry, I took an early withdrawal from my retirement account and ate the penalties because what else was I supposed to do? I maxed out 2 credit cards paying for things insurance wouldn't touch, and I picked up extra freelance work on weekends just to keep us afloat. Rebecca was in bad shape for weeks, couldn't walk without help, couldn't shower alone, needed medications round the clock. I did all of it because she's my wife and you don't abandon someone when they're down. I helped her to the bathroom at 2 in the morning. I drove her to physical therapy 4 times a week. I rearranged my entire work schedule so I could be there. Ethan helped when he could, but he was 16 and still had school. Natalie came home twice during those months and mostly stayed in her room. Rebecca started getting better around the 2-month mark, and that's when things got weird. She started spending hours on her phone, joining some support group for accident survivors, going out for coffee with people I'd never heard of. I figured it was part of her healing process, that she needed to talk to people who understood what she'd been through. But she started pulling away from me. Conversations got shorter. She stopped asking about my day. She'd flinch when I touched her shoulder. I thought maybe it was trauma. Maybe she was processing something heavy, so I gave her space. Then one night she sat me down in the living room with both kids there and said she wanted a divorce. Just like that. No build-up, no counseling, nothing. She said she'd been unhappy for years, that the accident made her realize life was too short to stay in a marriage that didn't fulfill her, that she wanted freedom and new experiences and a chance to actually live. I sat there completely silent because my brain couldn't process what I was hearing. Ethan looked horrified, but Natalie, my own daughter, turned to me and said, "Dad, don't make this about you. Mom deserves to be happy." I asked Rebecca if there was someone else, and she got defensive, said it wasn't about another person, it was about her finding herself. The whole thing felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech. I didn't sleep that night. I kept running the numbers in my head, everything I'd spent, everything I'd sacrificed, and this was the thanks I got. The next morning I told Rebecca and Natalie they had 1 hour to pack their things and leave. Rebecca acted shocked, said I was being cruel, said she never expected this kind of reaction. I told her I'd given her everything, including my financial future, and if she wanted freedom, she could have it, but not under my roof. Natalie started crying, called me selfish, said I was punishing Mom for being honest. I looked at her and said, "You're 19 years old. You picked a side. Now live with it." They both left that afternoon. Ethan stayed with me, told me he didn't understand what was happening, but he knew Mom was wrong. That kid saw what I couldn't see yet. The house felt empty, but also lighter. I couldn't explain it, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was drowning. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about how cold Rebecca had been, how calculated the whole divorce conversation felt. If she was really just finding herself, why the rush? Why the defense when I asked about someone else? So I did something I'm not proud of, but also don't regret. We'd always shared the desktop computer in the home office, same passwords, same accounts, nothing hidden because we trusted each other. I logged into her email. It took me about 10 minutes to find what I was looking for. Messages to someone named Adrian, going back 7 months. 7 months. That meant it started 2 months before the accident. I read through them, and my hands started shaking. This wasn't some emotional affair that got out of hand. This was a plan. I'll spare you the details, but the tone was clear as day. I was the backup, the wallet, the safety net while she figured out her exit strategy. One message from right after the accident said something about making the most of the recovery time. Another one from a month ago talked about how I'd taken out loans and how that was pathetic. She called me pathetic to this guy while I was literally helping her recover. I sat there staring at the screen until the sun came up. I wasn't angry. I was clear. I finally understood exactly who I'd been married to, and I knew exactly what I was going to do next. Notice the red flags that were there all along. Yoga classes that started 6 months before the crash, the defensive reaction when asked about another person, the rehearsed speech. The key lesson here is that when someone's behavior suddenly shifts after you've made a major sacrifice, it's worth investigating before assuming it's just trauma. Documentation becomes everything, which is exactly what happens next. I spent the next 3 days going through everything. Every email, every text backup, every shared document on that computer. What I found wasn't just an affair, it was a blueprint. Adrian wasn't some random guy she met at her support group. He'd been in her yoga class since last fall, and the messages made it clear they'd gotten close long before the crash happened. The earliest message I found was from 7 months back. Just casual flirting, but by month 5 they were talking about futures and fresh starts, and how Rebecca deserved better than her boring, stable life. There was one message from Adrian sent 3 days after her accident that said, "Take your time healing. I'm not going anywhere." And her response was, "I know, this changes nothing with us." That hit me harder than anything because I was sleeping in a chair next to her hospital bed that same week. But the worst part wasn't the romance. It was the cold calculation in how they talked about me. She told him I'd pulled money from retirement, and he replied asking if that meant I was desperate, and she said it worked for now. Another message from a month ago had her complaining about physical therapy, and Adrian asked if I was still playing nurse, and Rebecca wrote that I thought I was a hero, and it was honestly pathetic how much I needed to be needed. I had to walk away from the computer because I felt sick, not heartbroken sick, just disgusted sick. Then I found the money. Rebecca had a separate checking account I'd forgotten about, something she'd opened years ago for a side gig that never materialized. I only knew the login because we used the same password for everything. I logged in expecting maybe a few $100s, and the balance showed $32,000. $32,000. I sat there staring at that number trying to figure out where it came from, and then I checked the transaction history. Deposits going back 3 years, small amounts at first, then bigger chunks. Some of it was inheritance from her parents who'd passed a few years back, some was birthday money, some I couldn't track. But the point is she had $32,000 sitting there while I was draining my retirement and maxing out credit cards to pay her medical bills. She didn't offer a single cent. Not one. I checked the dates of my biggest withdrawals against her account activity, and there was nothing. She just watched me drown financially and said nothing. I called my lawyer the next morning. His name's Mr. Brooks. Been practicing family law for 30 years. Doesn't waste time on feelings. I laid out everything. The affair, the messages, the secret money, the timeline. He listened, took notes, and then asked if we had a prenup. I said yes. We'd signed one early in our marriage when Rebecca's parents were setting up their estate and wanted to make sure their money stayed in the family. Mr. Brooks asked if I had a copy, and I found it in our file cabinet that same day. He read through it and stopped on page 4. There was a clause about infidelity, standard stuff apparently, saying that if either party committed adultery, the prenup would be void and assets would be divided according to state law. Rebecca had insisted on that clause back then, said it was about protecting the marriage, and I'd signed it without thinking twice because I never planned on cheating. Mr. Brooks looked up and told me this changed everything, that if I could prove the affair, she wouldn't get the protection she thought she had. I told him to file for divorce immediately and to update my will while he was at it. I wanted Ethan as my sole beneficiary. Natalie got nothing. Mr. Brooks warned me that cutting out a child could be challenged, but I told him I didn't care, make it clear that her choices had consequences. Rebecca got served 4 days later. I wasn't there, but Ethan told me she called him screaming, asking what his father was doing, saying I'd lost my mind. She tried calling me 17 times that day, and I ignored every single one. Then she started texting, first angry, then desperate, then back to angry. She called me vindictive, said I was punishing her for being honest about her feelings, said I'd regret this. I didn't respond to any of it. Natalie sent me a long message saying I was destroying the family, that Mom made a mistake, but everyone deserves forgiveness, that I was being cruel for no reason. I blocked her number. Ethan asked me if I was okay, and I told him I'd never been clearer about anything in my life. Mr. Brooks moved fast, filing motions, requesting financial disclosures, citing the prenup clause. Rebecca hired her own lawyer, and they pushed back hard, claiming the affair started after we'd emotionally separated, that the prenup shouldn't apply. It was exactly the kind of legal dance I expected. Then things got worse. I was at work on a regular afternoon when 2 police officers showed up asking for me. My boss looked panicked. I walked outside with them, and they said they needed to ask me some questions about a domestic violence report. I actually laughed because I thought they had the wrong person, but then they said Rebecca's name. She'd filed a report claiming I'd physically hurt her during her recovery, that I'd been rough with her during care at home, that I'd grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, that she'd been afraid to say anything because she was dependent on me. I stood there completely frozen because this was insane. The officers asked if I'd ever laid hands on her, and I said never, not once, not even close. They asked if anyone could confirm that, and I said yes. My son Ethan was home most of the time. Plus, I had my work schedule showing I was barely home except to help with appointments. One of the officers seemed skeptical of the whole thing. He asked when these incidents supposedly happened, and the dates Rebecca gave didn't match up with my schedule at all. I offered to show them everything. My calendar, my work logs, the physical therapy appointment records showing her actual therapist was the one doing the sessions. They took notes and said they'd follow up. I called Mr. Brooks the second they left, and he said this was a tactic, a bad one, but still a tactic to make me look dangerous and gain leverage in the divorce. Ethan heard about the police visit from a neighbor and came home furious. He said Natalie had to know about this, that there was no way Mom filed a false report without talking to her first. I told him to let it go, that the truth would come out. But Ethan's sharper than I give him credit for. He went into Natalie's old room where she'd left some stuff, found her old laptop she'd forgotten in the rush, and it was still logged into her messages. He came downstairs 20 minutes later with the laptop open and said, "Dad, you need to see this." It was a conversation between Rebecca and Natalie from a week earlier. Natalie had asked if this would be enough to get the money, and Rebecca replied that it should be, that she wasn't losing everything because of some stupid clause. There were more messages, talking about how the police report would shift things in court, how I'd have to settle to avoid a trial, how they just needed to make me look unstable. Ethan was shaking when he showed me, said he couldn't believe his own sister would do this. I took screenshots of everything and sent them straight to Mr. Brooks. The next day, Mr. Brooks forwarded everything to the prosecutor's office. Filing a false police report is a crime, and conspiracy to file one is even worse. The detective who'd come to my house called me back, said they'd reviewed my evidence and the inconsistencies in Rebecca's story, and they were closing the domestic violence case with no charges. He also said the false report was being referred for potential charges against Rebecca and possibly Natalie. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. Rebecca called me that night from a number I didn't recognize. Caller ID showed as blocked, and I only picked up because I thought it might be work. She was crying, saying this had all gotten out of hand, that she never meant for things to go this far. I told her, "You called the cops on me with a fake story. You involved our daughter in a crime. This is exactly as far as you meant it to go," and I hung up. 2 weeks later, Mr. Brooks called and said the court date was set, discovery was complete, and he had everything he needed. He told me they'd tried to bury me and buried themselves instead, that I just needed to stay calm in court and let him handle it. I wasn't worried about staying calm. I was past anger by then. I just wanted it done. This is where documentation literally saved him from potential criminal charges. The work calendar, therapy records, and most critically, the The text messages between mother and daughter proved premeditation. The lesson here: when you're being falsely accused, every receipt, every timestamp, every witness matters. Never assume the truth will speak for itself. You have to build the case. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, just a regular room with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everything look tired. Rebecca sat at the opposite table with her lawyer, wearing a navy dress and minimal makeup, probably trying to look sympathetic. Natalie wasn't there. Mr. Brooks had warned me she'd likely stay away since showing up could make her look more involved in the false report conspiracy. Ethan sat behind me in the gallery, and I could feel him watching everything like he was memorizing it. The judge was a woman named Judge Reynolds, probably in her late 50s, with reading glasses on a chain and an expression that said she'd seen every trick in the book. Mr. Brooks had told me she was fair, but didn't tolerate games, which was exactly what I needed. Rebecca's lawyer started by painting me as controlling, said I'd used the medical crisis to establish financial dominance, that Rebecca had felt trapped and afraid. It was a performance, and not a good one. Then Mr. Brooks stood up and methodically destroyed every word. He presented the timeline of the affair, showed it started months before the accident, entered the text messages between Rebecca and Adrian into evidence. He showed the judge the secret bank account with $32,000, pointed out that Rebecca had watched me drain my retirement without contributing a cent. Then he brought up the prenup, explained the infidelity clause, and showed how Rebecca had tried to weaponize a false police report to gain leverage. The judge read through the messages herself, and I watched her face change from neutral to something colder. Judge Reynolds asked Rebecca's lawyer if he had any explanation for the affair timeline or the hidden money. He stammered something about emotional separation and financial independence, but it sounded weak even to me. Then the judge asked Rebecca directly if she'd filed the police report, and Rebecca said yes, but that she'd felt genuinely scared at the time, that her memory of the recovery period was confused. Judge Reynolds looked at her for a long moment and said, "Confused memory doesn't explain text messages planning the report with your daughter." Rebecca went pale, and her lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off. She said this wasn't just a marriage dispute, it was a pattern of calculated deception, and she wouldn't reward that behavior. The ruling came faster than I expected. The divorce was granted, the prenup was voided due to proven adultery, and assets would be split according to state law, which meant dividing everything, including Rebecca's hidden account. Ethan would remain with me. Rebecca would get standard visitation if he wanted it. And because she'd drained marital goodwill through her actions, she'd have to reimburse me for a portion of the medical expenses I'd covered. It wasn't full repayment, but it was something. Judge Reynolds finished by noting that the criminal case for the false report was separate and still pending. Rebecca started crying. Her lawyer put his hand on her shoulder, but I felt nothing watching it. No satisfaction, no anger, just a sense of something finally being over. I left the courthouse with Ethan, and we sat in my car for a few minutes not saying anything. He asked if I felt better, and I told him I felt clear, which was different but good enough. Mr. Brooks called that evening and said the divorce would be finalized in 30 days, that I should prepare for Rebecca to make one more attempt at reconciliation, because people always did. I told him I was prepared for anything. But what happened next I didn't see coming. I couldn't stop thinking about Adrian, this guy who'd helped blow up my life, and I wanted to know who he really was. So I did some digging. Social media, public records, the usual stuff you can find if you know where to look. Turns out Adrian had lied to Rebecca about being separated. He was still very much married to a woman named Claire, had been for 12 years, and they had 2 kids. The separation he'd mentioned to Rebecca was apparently fictional. I found Claire's contact information through a mutual connections profile, and I spent 2 days debating whether to reach out. Finally, I wrote her a letter, kept it factual, explained who I was and what I'd discovered, and included copies of the messages between Adrian and Rebecca. I told her I wasn't looking for revenge. I just thought she deserved to know the truth the same way I deserved to know it. I mailed it and tried not to think about it. For weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Claire. She thanked me for the letter, said she'd had suspicions but no proof, and that she'd already filed for divorce. She said Adrian had tried to deny everything, but the messages were undeniable, and her lawyer was taking him apart financially. She mentioned he'd been using joint credit cards for hotels and gifts, money that should have gone to their kids, and the judge in their case wasn't being kind about it. I told her I was sorry she was going through this, and she said, "Don't be. You gave me the truth." That's more than he ever did. We talked for a few more minutes, and then hung up. 2 months after that, I heard through Ethan, who'd heard from a friend, that Adrian had lost his job and was living in a cheap apartment because Claire's divorce had cleaned him out. Rebecca had apparently tried to keep the relationship going, but it fell apart fast once the money and future disappeared. Turns out Adrian was exactly like Rebecca, looking for an upgrade, not a partner. The criminal case against Rebecca and Natalie took 4 months, but eventually they both took plea deals. Rebecca got probation and community service, plus a fine. Natalie got the same, but hers came with a mark on her record. The university she attended found out about the charges and suspended her for a semester, something about conduct violations and integrity standards. Her scholarship was pulled pending review. She called Ethan crying about it, and he told her she'd made her choices. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Rebecca showed up at my door. I saw her through the window and almost didn't answer, but I figured I might as well hear whatever she had to say. She looked tired, older somehow, and she asked if we could talk. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. She said she'd made mistakes, that she'd been confused and scared after the accident, that she wanted to fix things. I asked her if she was serious, and she said yes, that we'd built a life together and it didn't have to end like this. I told her, Rebecca, you had $32,000 and watched me go broke. You planned to leave me while I was taking care of you. You filed a false police report. There's nothing to fix. She started crying and said she knew she'd messed up, but people deserve second chances. I said, you're a grown woman with a nursing degree and a working car. You'll figure it out, and I went back inside. Natalie showed up 3 weeks later. Same thing, standing on my porch looking miserable. She said she was sorry, that she'd been manipulated by Mom, that she needed help with tuition since her scholarship was gone. I looked at my daughter and felt nothing but distance. I told her she was an adult, that she'd picked a side and helped file a false criminal report against me, and that choices had consequences. She said I couldn't just cut her off, that I was her father, and I said, I'm Ethan's father too, and he's the one who stood by me. The college fund goes to him now. She called me cruel, and I said, no, I'm just done being the person everyone uses. She left, and I haven't heard from her since. Ethan asked me once if I'd ever forgive either of them, and I told him forgiveness wasn't the issue, trust was, and they'd burned that completely. He nodded like he understood. These days I'm rebuilding. The money's slowly coming back, work is steady, and the house is quieter but peaceful. Ethan's a senior now, and we're already looking at colleges. He wants to study engineering, and I told him I'd support whatever he chooses. I sleep through the night now, don't wake up feeling like I'm drowning in problems that aren't mine. People ask if I regret how hard I went after Rebecca and Natalie, if I feel bad about Claire's situation with Adrian, if I should have been more forgiving. I tell them I spent 23 years being the person who carried everything, and the moment I put it down I finally felt like I could breathe. They wanted freedom, they got it. I got mine too. The core takeaway here isn't about revenge, it's about boundaries and consequence. When you sacrifice everything for someone and they respond with betrayal and false accusations, protecting yourself isn't cruelty, it's necessity. The documentation, the legal strategy, the refusal to be manipulated by guilt, these are all lessons in standing firm when the people closest to you try to destroy you on their way out. Sometimes the only way forward is to let people face the full weight of their choices. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.